Once a sequence starts to grow in length, you'll find that some of your original shot choices just don't quite fit. Fortunately, there are several ways to quickly adjust the contents of your timeline. We'll start by looking at a process called three-point editing. Double-click a sequence to load it into the timeline. Using the mouse and JKL keys, navigate to a clip you want to replace. In this sequence, we want to replace the long pan at the start of the clip with a different shot. Hold down the Command key on a Mac or Control key on a PC while dragging the position indicator to snap to the start of the clip. To tell Media Composer that this is where we want to edit in new footage, press the I key. Up until now, you've only set in points on clips in the source monitor. For certain operations in the timeline, you'll use in and out points to determine what parts of the sequence are affected by your edits. Notice that the keyboard shortcuts are context sensitive. So, when you're working in the timeline, I sets an in point for your sequence, but when you're working in the source monitor, pressing I will set an in point there. Now load a new clip into the source monitor and set in and out points. You want the new clip's selected length from in to out to be at least as long as the clip you're replacing. You're now ready for a three-point edit. What are the 3 points? They are the in point of the source clip, the out point of the source clip, and the in point in the timeline. Click the Overwrite button, and this time Media Composer edits the clip into your sequence starting at the in point you set in the timeline. Now you may have already figured out why this is called an overwrite edit. It's because the video underneath is written over by the new video. But what if you're happy with all the video in your timeline, but you just want to insert an extra shot? In that case, you can perform a splice-in edit. Splicing is an old film term for cutting a piece of film in two and then adding another clip of film in between the two cut ends. That's a physical analogy for what you're doing with the splice-in tool. In this case, we want to add some shots of people to the landscape imagery. Double-click to load a new clip into the monitor. Move the position indicator to the point in the sequence at which you want to cut to the new clip. Press I to set an in point. Set in and out points for your clip, and this time, click the Splice In button. Media Composer shifts everything past the timeline in point down the timeline to make room for the new clip. So an overwrite edit replaces existing footage in the timeline, but a splice in edit makes room and inserts new footage within the existing footage. As we've said, the reason this is called a three-point edit is because you need 3 points. But they don't always need to be the same 3 points. Let's take a look at another example of a three-point edit. Here we have a case where we've edited out a pause by the on-screen talent, leaving an awkward jump cut between the two sides of the transition.
Run 4,000 miles in 3 months or less is basically it's never been done.
We'll cover over the edit with some other footage. This kind of edit's extremely common and it's often referred to as a cutaway. Position the timeline indicator just before the edit and set an in point. Then move to a point just after the edit and set an out point. Let's play in to out to review.
3 months or less is basically it's never been done.
So this time, instead of simply setting an in point in the timeline, we've actually set both an in point and an out point. To perform a 3-point edit, we only need 1 more point. Load a cutaway clip into the source monitor. This time, we'll just set an in point and leave the out point unset. When Media Composer performs the edit, it'll start at the in point you set and add the exact length it needs to fill the space between the in and out point you set in the timeline. So Media Composer will decide on the out point automatically. Now, you can click the Overwrite and Splice In buttons every time you make an edit, but when you're trying to cut a sequence quickly, that's a lot of switching between keyboard and mouse, and it'll slow you down. Instead, you can press the V key to perform a Splice In edit, and the B key to perform an overwrite. Here, we'll press B, and then review the edit.
4,000 miles in 3 months or less is basically it's never been done as far as I know. No one's ever run that far in that.
One last thing. In addition to using the Splice In button, you can also simply drag clips from the source monitor into the timeline. Now, while this might seem more intuitive to you, Try to get used to performing all your edits using the VMB keys for splice-ins and overwrites. Your editing speed will be that much faster in the long run.
And to do it without someone to help maintain our bodies. I mean, I call him the mechanic. You know, I mean, he's basically there to make sure